Basically, the story of Shifrah and Puah is a gzeira, an instruction from the king of Mitzrayim, the Pharaoh, to kill all male baby boys, obviously, first Jews, and eventually all males, including Egyptian boys. The Midrashim say that Pari had a dream. And in his dream, he saw stars falling out of the sky. And then a Yid picked up those stars, put them in his pocket, then took them out of his pocket and threw them into the Yam. That Pari had a dream, he saw stars falling out of the sky, a Yid picked them up, put them in his pocket, took them out of his pocket and threw them into the sea. Pari came running to his chachomim, there's different words, it's tagninim, chartumim, whatever the words were. And he says, what does this mean? And they all decided that it's not good. They got very nervous about it. And the conclusion that they told him was that this is a reference to Mashiach Shal Yisrael, who's going to save the Jewish people, and that he's going to be like a b'mayim. His demise, his end, his downfall is going to come from water. Now, of course, we all know that this refers to the story with hitting the rock in the 40th year in the Midbar, Mein Meriva. Moshe Rabbeinu was punished. He was not allowed to go into Eretz Yisrael because he hit the rock at the end of the 40 years rather than speak to the rock. Even though at the beginning of the 40 years he was told to hit the rock, at the end of the 40 years he was told to speak to the rock. He didn't speak to the rock, he hit the rock, and therefore Moshe Rabbeinu was loike b'mayim, he was punished through water. And of course, like it says in Chazal, it says in Rambam even, that kishif, that they were using alternative forms of clairvoyance, other than nevuah. The Lashon of the Rambam is, it's ma'at bar b'teich at heaven. It's like having tons and tons of straw and a few grains of wheat. So when people use methods of seeing the future that are not nevuah, that are not true, there's a mix of truth and falsehood. So they knew that the Savior of the Jewish people was born, which was not good for them. They knew that he was going to be like a b'mayim, who was going to be killed, punished through water, but they didn't know the specifics. So Pari made a gezeidah to kill every male. Originally every male Jew. Now the Medrash says that the gezeidah had 3 steps. The first step was to kill them at birth. To kill them at birth. In fact, the Medrash says, a newborn baby is not exactly in a position to fend for itself. The Medrash says that Pari's first gezeidah was that he said to Shifrah and Puah, kill them in a way that it looks like they died naturally. So as soon as the baby is born, a nursemaid, a woman who's delivering a baby, whatever they call him, a midwife, can very easily arrange that the baby shouldn't survive and it'll look completely innocuous. The baby died. Later on, Pari became more bold to throw them into the river the Nile. When he said to throw the babies into the river the Nile, he was no longer making pretense. He wasn't even trying to make it look like the babies died by themselves. He was saying outright, we're killing every Jewish male. Huh? The Medrash says that it's 2 different gezeidas. The Medrash says it was 3 different gezeidas.
Yeah, it was 2 different years.
Wait, let me finish. On the day that Moshe Rabbeinu was born, his visionaries told him that today Mashiach Shal Yisrael is being born. So he made the gezeidah that all boys have to be thrown into the river the Nile, including Egyptian boys. Born on the day that Moshe Rabbeinu was born, which was Zayin Adar. He took Yidden out of Mitzrayim in Shas Tov Memches, and he was 80 years old. So he was born in Shas Shin Samaches, right? In 2368, that's Moshe Rabbeinu's birth year. On that day, he had all the babies thrown into the river. So in the beginning, the Pari was trying to hide it.
From that on?
No, for that one day.
It was only for that one day?
Of course, because then had him for 3 months, Mistami. Yechavid put him in the river. It says in the Midrash, but as soon as Yechavid put him in the river, they saw that he's already in the river, they said it's over. And then Basi pulled him out. But that's a different part of the story which I didn't prepare, so I can't speak to it. According to the Medrash, in the beginning, Pari was trying to make it look like he's a good guy. And later on he became shameless. Just kill them all. First kill all Jewish babies and then to kill all baby boys. There's a fascinating... And of course they didn't listen to him. Shifrah and Puah did not listen. And they helped the babies be born, etc., etc., etc. And they were risking their own lives. Because when the king tells you to do something, a direct order, and you don't listen, you can lose your head. And there was a great miracle. The Midrashim say that one of the miracles that happened was that even though Pharaoh was so angry with Shifrah and Puah, he did not punish them. There's a fascinating chidah. I prepared to say it later, but I guess I'll say it now. The chidah goes into the nigla of this. Someone says to you, kill somebody, or I'm going to kill you. You're not allowed to do that. Because the three Avedas, Aveda Zara, Gilerois, and Shvichas Damim, you're supposed to die rather than commit those three Avedas. But this is before Matan Torah. And the chidah says that there's a lumdus, there's a question, halachic question, whether you say Ein Shliach L'Dvar Aveda by B'nai Nech. Those who learn Perek Echad Hayom Rambam, it's one of those weird Ashkacha Pratis that every time I prepare a class, it's can't get to something else. We're learning Hilchas Me'ilah. Today is Hilchas Me'ilah Perek Hey, I think. The rule is that you cannot make a Shliach do an Aveda. If I tell you to do an Aveda for me, I'm not liable, you are, because you shouldn't have listened to me. The famous words in Rashi and Bereshis, with the story of the Nachash, Divrei Arav, Divrei HaTalmud, Divrei Mi Shemim. The teacher tells you to do something, the student tells you to do something else. Who are you going to listen to? So the rule is, Ein Shlichat Van Aveda. If I send you on a Shlichas to do an Aveda, you're liable and not me, you shouldn't have listened to me. The one exception is Me'ilah. If I tell you to violate Kachim, and you do it on my behalf, I'm Moyel and not you. What about Goyim? If a Goyim makes another Goy Shliach to kill somebody, and the Shliach carries out the mission and kills that person, who's the murderer? Huh?
You go after the head.
So the Chidah proposes. Huh?
Rule 2, the whole thing is distorted.
Right, very good. The Chidah, very good. The Chidah argues that you could make a claim that by a goy yesh shliach Van Aveda. By B'nai Noach, if one goy tells another guy, kill somebody on my behalf, the guilty party is the Mishaleach. By a Yid, you say, Ein Shliach Van Aveda. If a Jew tells another Jew to do an Aveda and the second person does it, the second person is liable. But the Chidah proposes that by a Goy it's different. So Shifrah and Puah were told by Pharaoh to kill Jewish children. They had a din of B'nai Noach. By not killing those children, they were literally risking their lives. They could have gotten killed for not listening to the Pharaoh. Had they killed those children, they would not have been Choyev. Pharaoh would have been Choyev. Because Yesh Shliach Van Aveda by a Goy, even though it says in the Midrashim that in the beginning, Pharaoh told them to kill the babies as they were being born so that it shouldn't reflect negatively on him. But later on, he just lost all control. He said, you must kill him or throw him into the river. And then eventually said even to kill the Goyish babies, the Mitzrim babies. So the Chidah brings this to articulate the degree of Mesiras Nefesh that Shifrah and Puah had. Because if it's true that if Shifrah and Puah killed the Jewish boys, halachically they're doing a shlichus of Pari, and Pari is chayiv, and they're not chayiv, there would have been no liability on them. And if you would ask them, why did they kill Yiddish kids, they would have said, what do you mean? It was after them. Right? If they don't kill the Jewish children, they get killed, and there's a din of eredif. The din of eredif is that if someone is coming to kill you, you're allowed to kill them first. And one of the classic examples of eredif is, if a woman is having a baby, and she's dying in childbirth, and she's dying because of the birth, the child has a din of eredif. In other words, you look at the child as prospectively killing the mother, and you kill the baby to save the mother. That's one of the examples of eredif, which is brought in halacha. So here, Shifrah and Puah are killing these babies, because if they don't kill those babies, they're going to get killed. So they're saving themselves by killing the babies, because if they wouldn't kill the babies, they would get killed. So you could make the case. The way the Chidah doesn't say this, just came to me as I'm talking. They didn't. But the Chidah is trying to argue why it was such a big deal, because there could have been a good argument in halacha that they were not only allowed to kill the babies, maybe should have. They're saving themselves. You're not allowed to murder. Yes, shliach Van Aveda b'nei Noach. By a goy, shlichus helps even for an aveda. So Pharaoh was the murderer, they weren't. And nevertheless, Shifrah and Puah refused to kill those children, which only emphasizes and only enhances how great an act of Mesiras Nefesh it was that Shifrah and Puah refused to kill the children was. Okay, now, so what I want to do is, I want to read the psukim, okay? If you have a chumash, you're welcome to follow inside. If you don't have a chumash, you'll just listen to me. If it sounds good, it's the original biblical text. If it sounds bad, the Balkeda will immediately correct me. I'm just reading and typing the words, and I have a lot of notes, and we'll talk about them as we go. The king of Egypt, The king of Egypt employed a tactic called the Havanas Chakma, right? The Havanas Chakma. The tactic of Havanas Chakma was to manipulate the Jewish people into a position of subordination. The Jewish people were very powerful, and they were very independent. And they came up with this whole scheme that they're going to be doing great public works, and everybody has to pay a head tax. In other words, you don't just participate by writing a check, you have to physically come and do labor. And the Yidden were good Egyptians, they came to do the labor, and then over the course of 30 years, they slowly manipulated the Jewish people into positions of subordination. They became the slave laborers, and the Egyptians became the overlords. They became the masters. And after 30 years, the Jewish people were fully enslaved, and then for 86 years, for 86 years, 86 and 30 is 116. The slavery in Egypt, it says in the Shifrah and Puah, was 116 years, from the time that Levi died, at the age of 137. And for 86 years, the Jewish people lived basically in Auschwitz. Their lives were a living nightmare, it was a hell, it was a Gehenna on earth. And they slaved. After Pharaoh successfully effected this, Pharaoh wanted to maintain his hold. He was afraid that he was going to lose it. And when he had this dream and his stargazers told him, on top of all the other decrees, he made a decree that the Jewish children who are born have to, Jewish males who are born have to be murdered. So I'm going to read the psukim and translate them as we go. The king of Egypt says to the Jewish midwives, Shifrah, the name of the first is Shifrah, Hashem is Puah, the name of the second is Puah. Now, of course, the Midrashim and the Chazal and the Rishonim ask a very, very klotz kasha. The Jewish people numbered hundreds of thousands. There was a lot of Yidden. There are two midwives. Two midwives for thousands and thousands of people. It's impossible. So there's two basic answers to the question. The first answer to the question is that Shifrah and Puah were the head of the League of Midwives. Shifrah and Puah actually were overseeing hundreds of midwives, and Pharaoh called them and told them to pass along a message to the remaining midwives, and they didn't do it. That's one interpretation. A second interpretation is that the Egyptians, the Yidden, actually lived spread out in different parts of Mitzrayim, and Pharaoh called the local midwives, meaning to say, Pharaoh called Shifrah and Puah, they were the midwives for the Jewish people living in the city where the palace was, in the capital. So Pharaoh did not attempt to kill all the Jewish children all over Egypt. He attempted to kill the Jewish children living in the capital, and Shifrah and Puah were sufficient. There were actually two midwives to account for all the children being born in the city where the palace was in Mitzrayim at that time. Now, the name of the first is Shifrah, and on Shifrah there's three different interpretations. Shifrah B'Pashta says Yocheved, Moshe Rabbeinu's mother. Why was she called Shifrah? So one interpretation is that she was Mishaperes Avlad. She makes a baby look beautiful. When a baby is born, and listen, I had 10 children. I was terrible with the babies. Terrible. Ask my wife. I'm afraid of little babies. I can't even hold them. Newborns, they're so fragile. It's Pashut, I'm afraid of them. Until they're able to hold their heads up, I'm afraid to hold them. I'm a father, but it was very hard for me. Little kids, to take care of such helpless beings is an extraordinarily sensitive affair. But you have in halacha a fascinating idea that when a baby is born, obviously you know that the first thing they do is they take the whatever mucus may be in the throat, because the baby was in utero floating around in water. And in addition to that, they make the baby cry. And in addition to that, they stretch the baby's limbs. The halacha is that when a baby is born on Shabbos, and you stretch the baby's limbs, it's meleches boina. It has a status of building. Which is why a ben ches, which means a baby that you know for sure is going to die, which is halachically muktzeh. You know that a baby that's born a ben ches. Don't ask me how this plays out in the modern world, because there's no example of it in the modern world. But in halacha, when a baby is born and you know for sure that this baby does not have a life expectancy, he's not going to live 30 days, that child is muktzah on Shabbos. You're not allowed to help that child. You're not allowed to stretch its limbs because it's meleches boina, which is a deiraisa. And I'm assuming that that's what Shifrah means. The babies were born, she suctioned them with or without a machine, she patted them on the back until they cried, and she stretched their limbs to make them what a baby is eventually going to become. Remember, that baby has been curled up into a ball for 9 months, and now it's got to unfurl, it has to stretch out. This is the first interpretation of Shifra. The second one is Gor Gevaldik, because you would never think people hundreds of years ago would know this. Shifra is from the word Shfuferes, and Shfuferes means a tube. Because sometimes babies are born and they're not breathing. And the reason they're not breathing is because they swallowed with euconium, I forgot how you pronounce the word, they swallowed some of the amniotic fluid, and they're turning blue. You put a straw, in those days they didn't have plastic straws, they put a straw, a reed, into the baby's throat, and you suction it, and the baby comes back to life. So Shifra gave life to little children by literally putting a tube into their throat, suctioning out the fluids that were preventing them from breathing, and giving them life. I want you to know that since I started to talk, every 20 seconds, that door closes and opens, and someone walks around. It's remarkably interruptive. You have no idea how many times I've been interrupted in the last 17 minutes, 10 seconds. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. I've held my cool till now, but it's very, very hard. Incredibly, incredibly hard. Nobody else seems to notice but me. It's like a need. As soon as someone sits down, the next person gets up. I'm sorry that I'm human. It's one of those limitations that I have. Now, there's a third interpretation of Shifra, because the word Shifra, in a lot of Rishonim you have this. The Tur is the expert, the Baal Tur is the expert of this. There are words that appear in Tanakh very infrequently. And there are Sfarim that list how many times the word is brought. To give you an example, Bechein, right? Bechein. How many times you have in the word Tanakh? Ubechein. Ubechein Ovi Alamelech Hashalech Hados. There are 4 Becheins in the entire Tanakh, and that's why on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur we say Ubechein 4 times. And if you look in the Baal Turim on the Chumash, he'll very, very often bring a word and he'll say, this pasuk appears in Tanakh 3 times. This word, 3 times, 4 times, twice. And he'll correlate them. He'll show the parallel between them. The word Shifra appears in Tanakh twice. The first place is here, and the second place is in Sefer Iyov. The Lashon HaPasuk is Beruach Shamayim Shifra. Now, I did not look up the pasuk, so I may be mispronouncing it completely. But Beruach Shamayim Shifra means that Shifras can do with the spirit of Shamayim. So it says in Svarim, I forgot if it's a Medrash or it's from the Rishonim, that Shifra was called Shifra because she had a son who went up into the heavens. That's why. Because the other place in Tanakh where the word Shifra appears, it says Ruach Shamayim Shifra. Shifra produced a boy, produced a child that went up into the heavens, and she's called Shifra because in the other place in Tanakh where the word Shifra is mentioned, it's associated with the spirit of heaven. So you have 3 different reasons why her name is Shifra. And to me, the most fascinating one is the middle one, that she literally did suctioning, like they do today. Now they do suctioning with machines. She took a tube, put it in the baby's throat, and suctioned the mucus out of the baby's throat and saved babies' lives. Puah, there's 2 opinions who Puah is. And one is weirder than the next. The first interpretation is Isha Obita, that Puah was Miriam. Now the reason this is weird, because she couldn't have been more than 4 or 5. Because Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't born yet. She was only 5 years older than Moshe. And this little girl was involved in delivering babies. And there's 2 interpretations to why she's called Puah. One of them is that when the babies were born, her mother took physical care of the babies, and she nurtured them. She would coo to them, she would sing them, she would cradle them. She did things that a 5-year-old, even an ordinary 5-year-old, could do. And certainly an extraordinary 5-year-old that Miriam was able to do. But there's another interpretation of the word Puah, that Puah connotes moaning, it connotes crying, and that she's called Puah because she cried for Moshe. She was called Puah because, as we know, when Moshe Rabbeinu was born, she went down to the river the Nile to see what's going to happen to the little boy. So there's 2 interpretations of why Miriam is called Puah. The second one is that because she cried when her brother was placed in the river the Nile. But there's another opinion that says that it's Kala v'chamoisa, a daughter-in-law and a mother-in-law, not a mother and a daughter. Now, if it's Kala v'chamoisa, it's Elisheva bas Aminadav. That's Aaron's wife. Now that's even weirder, because Aaron was 3 years old. Miriam was Mela. She was the grand old age of 5. Miriam was older than the 2 of them, and Aaron was 3. Now, To think that Aaron was already married to Elisheva Bas Aminadav, and that Elisheva Bas Aminadav was the assistant of Yocheved is really, really hard to comprehend, but there is such a day in Medrash, in Chazal.
Could it be that it was before they were married?
Huh?
Could it be that it was before they were married?
Okay, before they were married, but she wasn't. I mean, listen, Yocheved was was like, I don't know, 100 years older than her husband. Yeah, Miriam was 85 years older than her husband, so maybe Elisheva was an old lady and Aaron was a little boy. But the Lashon Kala v'Chamaisa connotes that they were already married. Anyway, so whatever the case is, Shifrah and Puah were instructed by the Pharaoh to kill the babies. At first inconspicuously, then overtly and shamelessly by throwing them in the Jordan Island, and ultimately even kill the Egyptian babies, and they refused. And again, if you say that they were the Sorim of all the midwives, Shifrah and Puah had to pass this message on to other women, and either they didn't tell them or other women didn't listen either. So it was basically an uprising. The king is telling a group of people who were essentially slave laborers, who were given death rations. They did the same thing that the Nazis did. They gave them enough food to keep them alive for a few months, and as their bodies would deteriorate, they would send them to the gas chambers and they replaced them. The story of the Yidden Mitzrayim, when you read about it in the Chazal, it sounds like 86 years of Auschwitz. And not only didn't they die, they had babies. I had a conversation with the boys last night because we didn't have the regular group, so we said, okay, give us a preview. There were no babies in Auschwitz. The men and women were kept separate. There were no babies in Auschwitz. In Mitzrayim, there were babies, lots of them. And they were born with the greatest Mesirus Nefesh and the greatest miracles. And Shifrah and Puah either didn't send the message or the people didn't follow the message. They refused to kill the babies. Now, of course, we all know the stories. It says in Midrash Chazal that the men were exhausted. The men were totally exhausted because they worked so hard. They were slaves. And the women would be makashtes atzatzman. They used copper mirrors. They'd make themselves look beautiful. They would find their husbands in the fields, and they would seduce them, and they would conceive, and they would get to have babies. And of course, later on in the Chumash, the women come with these copper mirrors, and Moshe Rabbeinu says, "Fair. Everything about this is inappropriate. B'chlal, intimacy between a man and a woman is not theistic. Especially, it wasn't done in the privacy of a home; it was done in the field, which is so unsneistic, so inappropriate." And Hashem says, no, this is the holiest item of all, because these women had Mesirus Nefesh to be Yiddish Kindlach into the world, and you're going to make from this the kiyah, the water basin, that the Gemara says, that the kiyah is used, la'aseh sholim ben ish le'ishtei. What is the water basin, the basin of Mikdash for? You think it's to wash the hands of the Kohanim? Think again. The water from the kiyah basin was designed to take the waters of Saita. And the waters of Saita were designed not to kill the Saita, but to prove that she has fidelity to her husband, and to make shalom bias. So they took from the kiyah, the copper mirrors were used to make the kiyah, which was used to create shalom bias, because of the Mesirus Nefesh that the women, and I want you to know, that one of the Midrashim says, I'm sorry that I'm not going in order. At the end of the parasha it says, Vayas lahem batim. Hashem made for them homes. So Bepashtas, Vayas lahem batim means Hashem made homes for Yocheved and Miriam. But the Midrashim say Vayas lahem batim means Pare made homes. And one of the interpretations was he made homes for the Jews, so they shouldn't have babies in the fields, so that they would know where the babies were. They should be able to take them away and kill them. Vayas lahem batim, they gave the Yidden homes because they were having babies in the fields. And of course, the end of the story was when a woman was about to have a baby, she went out into the field, she delivered the baby. If the baby was a female, she took her home. If the baby was male, she left him in the field. And the earth would swallow them up, and then there was one rock that gave them milk and one rock that gave them honey. And when they were grown, they would literally grow out of the ground like grass, which is, by the way Tchias HaMesim is described. The person dies, you bury a seed in the ground. When the conditions are right, it grows out of the ground. They leave the babies on the ground, they'd be swallowed up by the earth, and when they're grown up, they would come home. The Chazal, it says in Sfarim that by the Haggadah you have to say the pasuk, which is describing this process by which the Yiddish Kinder had Mesirus Nefesh to bring children into the world.
Like, was there one field?
Huh?
Like, was this like a Jewish?
Again, it depends on how you want to see this. If it's local to the city where Pari lived, then it may have been one field. But if it's all the Jews, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, impossible. And the pasuk says, "Vayomer Melech Mitzrayim," the king of Egypt says, "Lam yaldas ibis," to the Jewish midwives, "Achei Temimim Shifrah." The first one's name is Shifrah. V'shem Hashem is Puah. The second one's name is Puah. Vayomer, and he says, "Beyaletchen es ivriyes," when you are going to help the Jewish women deliver their babies. Or isam al havnoim. Havnoim was I guess you would call it in the modern world, stirrups. It's a process by which a baby can be born. And you'll see im bein hu, if the baby is male, v'amit, they say kill him on the spot. V'imbasi, if the baby is female, v'choya, and you should give her life. And the Gemara says that you could tell from how the baby is delivered. If the baby is delivered in one direction, it's male. If the baby is delivered in a different direction, it's female. I don't know how that works out with modern baby delivery. V'choya, should give her life. So there's a famous sikha of the Rebbe which has to be mentioned. It's a gewaldig, a very, very important sikha, where the Rebbe asks the klotz kasha. Pari wants to kill the males, not the females. So why doesn't Pari say, "In ben of amitanes," if it's male, kill the baby and that's it? Why does Pari have to add, "In basi v'choya," if it's female, give them life? That wasn't the gzeira. The gzeira was to kill the boys, it wasn't to kill the girls. And he shouldn't have mentioned "In basi v'choya." So the Rebbe answers the question by making another observation. How did they kill the babies? Although not initially, but later on, by throwing them into the river Nile. What is the river Nile? The river Nile was the Avodah Zarah of Mitzrayim. So they weren't simply killing children. They were sacrificing them to their gods. They were giving them away to Avodah Zarah. And on that basis, the Rebbe says famously, in Benu, if it's a male child, and they say, kill him completely in the Avodah Zarah. V'imbasi, if it's a female, v'chaya, keep her alive. But v'chaya is a part of the Gezerah, because v'chaya means keep her alive in the spirit of the Avodah Zarah of Mitzrayim. That's what the Rebbe teaches it. The males are thrown into the Avodah Zarah, and the females are kept alive to live according to the principles of the Avodah Zarah itself. So not only was there a Gezerah against the boys, there was a Gezerah against the girls, and you could make the case that in a way the Gezerah against the girls was worse. The Gezerah against the boys was killing them physically. The Gezerah against the girls was killing them beruchnius, that they should be raised in the spirit of Avodah Zarah. Vatiren, I'm reading the next pasuk. Vatiren am yaldas es halikim. The midwives feared God. They had yiras Hashem. But also they didn't do kasher diber alein melech Mitzrayim, as they were instructed by the king of Egypt. Vatachal yeras hayalad them, and they actually gave the children life. Meaning now they didn't kill them, but they actually gave them life. So now the midwives were afraid of God. What were they afraid? The midwives were afraid of God. What were they afraid? That he's going to send a lightning from heaven and kill him. The Abishah didn't understand that these midwives were between a rock and a hard place. Because b'derech hateva, either these midwives kill these babies, or Padre kills them. And again, if you go with the chidah, that yesh talichas l'dvar aveda kedem matenteda by the Shavah mitzvahs, they would have been the murder would have been the Padre and not them, and they would have been saving their own lives. So what were they afraid of? V'atirena hamyaldes es alakim. The midwives feared God. You have to say pshat Rabbi Yossi that this was not yiras ha'onesh, it was yiras ha'reimamas. That Shifrah and Puah are not afraid that Hashem is going to punish them. You have Chassidus, you have yiras ha'onesh, you have yiras chet, you have yiras alakim, you have yiras Hashem. Shifrah and Puah are not afraid that Hashem is going to punish them. They had no liability. You can actually argue that halacha could be required to kill those babies, because those babies, you could make the case had a din of eretiv, especially if you go with that chidah, that yesh liach al by the Shavah mitzvahs b'neach, and they were b'nei neach. So Shifrah and Puah had yiras Hashem, but what kind of yiras Hashem? This is wrong, and we're not going to do it. Okay, why was it wrong? Why was it wrong? Why was it wrong? Why was it wrong to kill these babies to save themselves? Why was it wrong? Why was it wrong? Let's wait. I'll get back to the yiras Hashem later, but understand that it's important to understand that when it says in our pasuk, Vatirena hamayaldes, that the midwives were afraid, there was not a yiras ha'onesh. It was yiras shamayim at the highest level. Shifrah and Puah, let's call it yirei Allah. They sort of had a sense of God in front of them. They feared God in the most positive way. A true story. My father told me the story. They were my sister. So Zan Gezurshak was a little girl. So my father told the stories of the Baal Shem Tov. And one of the famous stories of Baal Shem Tov was that the Baal Shem Tov His father passed away when he was 4 or 5 years old. And he called him Hashem to his bedside. And he told him very famously, Yisraelik, Yisraelik, fear nothing except for God himself. So my sister was 2 years old, says to my father, Tati, why? Is God scary? Is Hashem scary? A little girl. You should fear nothing except for the Eibishter. Why should I fear the Eibishter? I like him. How do you answer a 2-year-old that asks such a question? It's like Gavaldi Kamaise. The teretz is, it's not I'm afraid he's going to hit me. It's an awe, it's a respect. The Miyaldes had Yiras Hashem, not that he was going to punish them, but a real fear of God, a more meaningful fear of God. And they said, we're not doing this. We're not killing children even if it costs us our lives, even if halachically we're required to do it, like the famous verse from the Alter Rebbe. Yeah, Olam Haba, not Olam Haba, I'm not eating treif. The Mayalde said, we're not killing Jewish children, we're killing babies. Finish, we're not doing it. So like also they didn't do, as they were commanded by the king of Egypt, and they gave the babies life. Now there's a very interesting observation made, and I forgot by who, that it's interesting, the Pasuk Tezvav and Tezayim, which describes the Pare speaking to the women, it says Vayomer. In Pasuk Yudzayin it says Kasha Diber. What's the difference between the word Vayomer and Vayedaber? Vayomer is soft. And Vayedaber is hard. So it says in the Mefarshim that the Pare calls Shifrah and Puah. He talks to them very sweet, very sweet. I need to ask you a favor. You're such good citizens of our great nation. Da 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 da. You need to do this for me. When it came to it, the Pare was furious. And that's why it says Kasha Diber Alein. He spoke to them outwardly very gently. He spoke to them like he was just asking them a favor. But they understood that this Amira was actually a dibur. In other words, this outer gentleness was exactly that. It was a superficial gentleness. And underneath the gentleness, there was a viciousness, and there was a aggression, and there was a threat, and an intent to harm. So the psukim that describe how he spoke to them, it says Vayomer. The psukim that describe how they refused him, it says Kasha Diber. Because when they didn't listen, the Pharaoh was no longer in a good mood. And the Pharaoh revealed to them that when he spoke to them before gently, there was nothing gentle about it. As far as he was concerned, they were made in Malchus, they were given a direct order to kill babies, covertly or overtly, and they didn't do it. So the pasuk continues in Sheni. Vayikra melach Mitzrayim lamayalde. So the king of Egypt calls the midwives. And again it says Vayomer. He's still talking softly. Madua asisa nesadavar azeh. Why did you do this thing? And you gave the children life, the males and the females. I gave you a direct order. Kill them. Either kill them as they're coming out or kill them later on. Why did you not kill the children? So the midwives speak to the Pharaoh. This is the first time in this entire story the word Pare is mentioned. I'd love to know, in this entire sequence, except for here, and except from here, he's called Melech Mitzrayim. Right? In Pasuk Tezvav he's called Melech Mitzrayim. In Pasuk Yudzayin it's called Melech Mitzrayim. In the beginning of Pasuk Yudchai it's called Melech Mitzrayim. All of a sudden in Yudtes he's called Pare. There's a reason why. In the first few Pukim he's called the King of Egypt. And maybe you could say that until that point he was trying to save face. He was trying to look like a nice guy. He wanted to do it. Yeah. So you call him the King of Egypt. But eventually he showed his true colors, that he wanted to kill kids. So now we say who he is. His name is Pare. So the midwives answer the Pharaoh, and they tell him like this. Jewish women are not like Egyptian women. Because they're choyos. What does choyos mean? They're alive. They're animals. They're strong. And there's one more translation of choyos. They're going to live forever. And because of these various characteristics, before the midwife arrives, the babies are born, and you instructed us to kill them inconspicuously. You instruct us to kill them as they're being born. The babies are born before we arrive. Now, with the word kichoyos, I found 4 different interpretations. Okay? The first interpretation of choyos is that they're midwives. Every Jewish woman knows how to have a baby and deliver them themselves. Have you ever watched, you know how animals deliver babies, right? If you watch National Geographic, you know animals deliver babies. Nobody helps the mother have a baby. The baby is born. Now, if they're predators, so the babies are born in a very, very underdeveloped state, and the babies are born in hiding, and the mothers have to protect them, right? And if they're the hunted, if they're prey, the babies are born out in the open, in many cases, and the mother eats up the placenta, so they shouldn't leave a trace. And it's also good she needs that for re-strengthening her body. Within 15 minutes after birth, those little babies are running around, or they're eaten up by hyenas, right? Animals just have babies. So they said to the Pharaoh, the Jewish people, Achayes, they're midwives, they have babies themselves. Alternatively, when Yankov Avinu gave them brachas, he gave them a bracha that compared them to the animals. Yehuda Aryeh, Naphtali Yarishlucha, Binyamin Ze'ev, Dan Nachash, the Jewish people are compared to animals. And like animals have a very easy time delivering babies, the Jewish women are very easy delivering babies. There's simply no opportunity to kill the babies inconspicuously. I'm sorry.
What about the tribes that aren't compared to animals?
So the Rashi says, Ish asher kiberchosai beirach oisam, that he then he gave each one of the Shvatim all the brachas, because Reuven, Shimon, and Levi never got a bracha altogether. So Rashi says in Pashas Vayechi, and then it says again in V'teis HaBracha, when Moshe Rabbeinu gave a bracha, that he gave each Shevet individual bracha, and then he gave all the Shvatim, all 12 brachas, so all of the Shvatim are compared to animals. The Ibn Ezra writes, and other Rishonim write, that Kichoyes Hena means they're Pashut very healthy. I mean, when a woman has a baby, you'll get married and you'll know. When your wife has her first baby, she's going to think she's Superman. She's going to want to walk around, and you better make sure that your mother-in-law is there and you get along with her so that she'll take care of your wife. But a woman doesn't know that if she has a baby, if she doesn't rest, it's a sakana pashut. For the first 3 days, it's pashut dangerous. After she has 2 or 3 kids, she'll be very happy to lay in bed. But when they have their first baby, they think they're very strong. To have a baby and to just get up and work, you have to be incredibly physically fit. So he says to Pare, they're slaves. These people work hard. They're in very good shape. So they deliver a baby and they're not worn out. They're not a rag. They get up and they do what they have to do. And they're very, very, very physically strong. So they don't need midwives. They're never in a vulnerable position where we're able to kill these children inconspicuously. And then I think there's a chidah. I'm almost positive the chidah who offers a final interpretation. And I'm going to read into the chidah additional words. Choye Seina means they're living forever. Now what does that mean, they're living forever? They're like Adam and Chava before the original sin. Adam and Chava before the original sin were supposed to live forever. The Yidden, when they got the Torah, it says in Zohar, that the Paskas who are Machon, they're supposed to live forever, if not for the fact that they made the Egel Azov. So she says to the Pharaoh, Choyes Heina, they're going to live forever. Now what does that mean? They're going to live forever means they're not affected by the original sin. What does that mean? If they're not affected by the original sin, having babies is not painful. Just like Tzidkanias, the facts are, holy women have babies very quick and very painlessly. It's almost an unobservable fact. He says they're every single Yiddish phrase that's Tzidkanias. And they're delivering babies like Chava had babies, that it says Chava delivered a baby, and she said to Hevel, go bring me a tzroy, bring me a knife. I remember the Rebbe saying about Fabrengen to cut the umbilical cord, because Cain and Hevel were born like 20-year-olds, like adults. It was all one day. They were born on Friday, Erev Shabbos. It's fun. After Mashiach is going to come, instead of a pregnancy being 9 months, it's going to be 9 hours. So Chava says to Hevel, go bring me a tzroy, and I'll cut the umbilical cord, and we'll tie it. He says these Yidden are in a maimed matzav of kedem achet before the original sin, and there's no pain. There's no pain whatsoever. And therefore, we're never in a position where we're able to kill the children inconspicuously because there's just no opportunity. And you should know that this is a ness. Okay, there's a scientific explanation. There's a very physical explanation for why it's so much harder for a human baby to be born than for an animal. And there's 2 parts to it. Number one, no animal in the entire world, animal kingdom, has a head as big as a human head. Because we have by far, the largest brain. And even after the baby's born, for the first 6 months, the reason there's a soft spot here, where you put on film, is because the brain is still growing and the skull needs to expand. Because we have such large brains, it's very difficult to deliver the babies. And second of all, we're the only animal that walks bipedally, upright. So our legs are very close together. That's the explanation, B'derech HaTeva, why a woman has a hard time delivering a baby. But Nevertheless, by tzaddikim, by tzidkonius, it's not painful. And Shifrah and Puah say to Pari, they don't have babies like everybody else. There is never a time that they're vulnerable. And then we read the next pasuk. So this is the story. And Shifrah and Puah risked their lives, literally, to defy the king of Egypt, not to kill the babies and let the babies live. There's another Pirush which is brought in Sfarim that Pari was teveh them la'aveda, which they also refused, which was another thing that they're risking their life for, and then they got their schar. Rabbi Yossi, the reason I decided to give this class is because of this. The schar that Shifrah and Puah got is written in the Chumash in a very strange way. I'm reading. Vayitav Elokim lamayaldis. God was good to the midwives. Vayirev ha'am, the people multiplied. Vayatzma ma'oid, and they became very, very many. Now, somebody shaynim say that it's two separate things. Vayitav Elokim lamayaldis is one thing. Hashem was good to the midwives. Well, how was he good? That Pare did not choose to execute them. Then there's a separate thing. Vayirev ha'am, the people multiplied. Vayatzma ma'oid, and they became very, very many. Okay? So you could read that Vayetev Elokim lamayaldes is separate from Vayirev ha'am vayatzma ma'oid, that Hashem was good to the midwives, that Pari didn't kill them. Vayirev vayatzma is a separate thing. But you could also read it that Vayetev Elokim lamayaldes, Hashem was good to the midwives. What was the kindness? Vayirev ha'am vayatzma ma'oid, they had a lot of babies. Rashi says, Vayetev Elokim lamayaldes, Mahu ha'toiva. So he brings from the next pasuk V'yasla and Batim. But in between, you have the words Vayirev ha'am vayatzma ma'oid. In other words, one of the way to understand this pasuk was these women had mesiras nefesh not to kill Jewish children, and Hashem did them a favor. What was the favor? That a lot of Jewish children were born. Hashem gave Shifrah and Puah, Yocheved and Merim, a schar for their mesiras nefesh not to kill little Yiddish kinderlach, that more babies are born. In other words, their whole mindset as a Yiddish kiddush coming through. I want to tell you a story. I'm going to say it with a name, and I hope I'm not disallowed. There was a woman in Lubavitch whose name was Mrs. Afton. She had 14 children, but not today, in the 1950s. Nobody had 14 children in the 1950s. She was a tzadikis, the mother of all the Aftons. And she had 7 kids, and the doctor said to her, no more. If you have any more children, you're going to die. Your plumbing is not healthy. It's very, very dangerous. You have to stop having babies. So she went into the rebbe, and she argued with the rebbe. She said to the rebbe, I survived the Holocaust only to have 7 kids. Now 7 kids for most people is a mishpacha. How could the doctor say I can't have any more children? I want to have as many kids as I absolutely can. So I've got how the Rebbe worded it, but the Rebbe said, okay, you'll have twice as many. She had 14 kids. The Rebbe said, when she told the Rebbe that she wants to bring Yiddish Kindlach into the world, so the Rebbe said, basically, don't listen to the doctor, and she had 2 times 7. She had 14 kids. Here you have women who are Mesa Nefesh, not like the Yiddish Kindlach, and the Abish that does them a favor, that all the Yidden had many children. This was their schar. I'm going to get back to this. Now, what does the next pasuk say? Vayehi. And it was. This word Vayehi, I would love to analyze, and I've been studying it, and I don't know how to explain it. Ki yaru hamiyalde says v'alikim, that the midwives showed Yiras Hashem. Here Yiras Hashem comes up a second time. That the Miyalda showed fear of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, v'yas lahem batim, the Eibush made for them batim. Homes, and Rashi says, Batei Kuhuna, Batei Leviah. Yocheved is the mother of Canaan and Levium, and Batei Malchus, Miriam married Kalev, who's the great grandfather of David HaMelech. So between Shifrah and Puah, you have Kuhuna, Leviah, and Melucha. That's what Rashi says. And I told you before that there are interpretations that say V'yas lahem batim, that Pare made homes. In other words, it was part of the punishment. And there's 2 pirushim in the Chazal. What V'yas lahem batim means. One pirush is V'yas lahem batim, it made homes for the Jewish people, so they shouldn't have babies in the fields. So they should know when babies are born, they should be able to kill them. And a more sinister interpretation was V'yas lahem batim means he moved Egyptians into the Jewish neighborhoods. He moved the Egyptians into the Jewish neighborhood that they should see who's pregnant. And they should follow the pregnancies, and they should be able to report and kill Yiddish kinder. So 2 interpretations of V'yas lahem batim is that it was actually part of the Gezerah. The Pare made homes, either for the Yidden, so they shouldn't have babies in the field, or for the Egyptians, they should be able to report on the process of the pregnancies. But the Rashi says that it was the schar. So kum toi sazoy. Shifrah and Puah got 2 schar, according to what we're reading, right? In Pasuk Chaf it says, "Vayitav Elokim Yas Hashem was good to the midwives. Vayirav ha'am v'yatzim and the people multiplied; they became very many." And I'm reading it bepashtus. The goodness that the Eibishter gave the Mayaldes was that a lot of babies were born. And then it says, "Vayhi ki yaru," because the idea of Hashem v'yas lahem batim. What's the pshat? And I want to give you my insight. I'm going to say 2 different interpretations, a simple one and a little bit of a deeper one. My interpretation is this: one of the ideas that you learn about Yiddishkeit, especially before Matan Torah, is that you're not supposed to do mitzvahs only for Hashem. You're doing mitzvahs only for Hashem as a big mailah. What's the mailah? You have Kabbalah Sale, you have Bittul, you have Yira. But it has a very, very big chesed. If you do mitzvahs only for the Eibishter, it's not previous, right? You don't want to do it, Hashem told you. The Rebbe has a sikh in Chelekei Lech Lecha, where he says that the whole reason Sefer Bereshis is recorded is to teach us that each one of us needs to earn our relationship with Hashem, even though we're already born Jews. Now, when you do a mitzvah, there has to be 2 bases. Number 1, you do the mitzvah because you understand it and you agree with it and you like it. And number 2, because Hashem said. And on a certain level, those 2 contradict each other. If I'm doing a mitzvah because I like it, because it makes sense to me, the mile of that is how personal it is to me. The chesed is that it's subjective. For those who come to my morning Chassidus class, we translate the word subjective as selfish. But for a Yid to be Jewish completely, you can't just do it for God, you got to do it for you. And this is especially true by Goyim. Because by Goyim, the whole definition of mitzvahs is Lasheves Yitzhara, to make the world a civil place. Hashem gave Goyim mitzvahs to create civility and order, to create normalcy. So Miriam and Yocheved and Miriam got 2 schar. Number 1, for their human commitment to what's right. Having children is a good thing. It's part of the Eibush made the world. It's a mitzvah, in fact. It's a mitzvah not on Yidden, it's a mitzvah on all mankind, including Goyim. Be fruitful and multiply it, fill up the world and conquer it. And by the way, I have a Gavaldik Akasha. There's a rule that says that Ein Lemeidim Lifnei Matan Torah, you're not allowed to learn a mitzvah from what's written before the Eibishter gave us the Torah. There is no place in the Chumash where the mitzvah of having babies is repeated a second time after Har Sinai. Bris Milah is repeated again after Har Sinai. Gidanoshet is a very famous Rambam. But Pru'arvu was given in the beginning of time, and from if you look in the Rishonim who bring Psukim, the Rambam, the Chinuch, what's the source of the mitzvah of having babies? Pru'arvu B'Pashat Bereshis. That's a mitzvah on Goyim. It's not a mitzvah on Yidden. Why that works for Yidden, I don't know. But there's a mitzvah on all of mankind to have children and to protect children and look after children. Miriam and Yocheved did what they did as human beings. There was a humanity to them. And they did it because this was the right thing to do in the parameters of being a mensch or Lasheves Yitzhara. So Hashem rewarded them for that. Hashem rewarded them for the human half of doing mitzvahs. What was the reward that Hashem gave them for the human half of doing mitzvahs? That a lot of babies were born. When a baby was born, they were happy. It's a good thing. Another child came into this world. Another Jewish child came into this world. So the Eibishter gave them a schar, midah keneged midah. They understood how wonderful it is for babies to be born. I mean, there's people who go to medical school to become doctors, and they say, I'm going to help women deliver babies. It's the only part of medicine which is healthy. Doctors deal with sick people, except doctors who help babies being born. Shifrah and Puah were helping babies being born, and the Eibishter gave them a human schar that many babies were born. But then there's something else. They didn't only do the mitzvah because it made sense to them. They also did the mitzvah because Hashem said, "Vayhi ki yaru hamayaldes esalakim." In addition to these women keeping this mitzvah because it made sense to them, they did this mitzvah because they were commanded. And the proof was that they did it out of yira, not out of ava. Right? Mitzvah saseh is supposed to do out of ava. Mitzvah slay saseh is supposed to do out of yira. They did a mitzvah saseh of helping babies being born out of yira, meaning this was God's will. And they understood that besides the fact that it makes sense to them, you do it because Hashem says, And for this, they got a separate schar. They were given homes. One of the boys told me last night, protected environments, safe environments, closed environments, holy environments, kahuna, melucha, levia, melucha. So my first read is that Shifrah and Puah were given two schar for two things. Doing a mitzvah humanely and doing a mitzvah by the divine command. Now for me and you, I would say that first of all you have to do it because Hashem said. Second of all, you have to do it because you're a person. In the case of Shifrah and Puah, first they did it because they were people, and then they did it because the Eibishter said, and they were given two schar. They were given the schar for their humanity, and they were given schar for the Yiddus Hashem. This is my first interpretation. Now I want to give you a second one. And this second interpretation is consistent with what I told you last week in Vayechi. I'm making this up, but it's based on a sikha. It really is based on a sikha. The Aves had a din of Yidden. The Shvatim had a din of Bnei Noach. The Aves kept Hayag mitzvahs, the Shvatim only kept Sheva mitzvahs Bnei Noach. But even the Aves, if there was ever a conflict between keeping the Sheva mitzvahs and keeping the Tayag mitzvahs, they had to keep the Sheva mitzvahs first, because the Tayag mitzvahs they were doing as volunteers. So I explained to you last week that when Yankov says to Yosef, Mi Eila, how could you have children? So I said, Yankov showed him Mishtar Eidus, Mishtar Kiddush. Yosef showed Yankov, he says, listen, I'm a Ben Erech, I'm a Goy. But I married my wife with Dinah Yisrael, with Kiddush. So these children are Yiddish kinder. And if they're Yiddish kinder, I told you two things last week. Number one, I did a mitzvah. I don't have to make a cheshbon. We're going to be tzdikim with the shayim. And number two, they're going to be zeichet at Tchiyas HaMesim. I'm saying the same thing now. Shifrah and Puah gave these children life on two levels. Number one, as goyim, as bnei noach. A ben noach is not allowed to kill a baby. Finished. As you may or may not know, abortion for a goy is worse than abortion for a yid. That's the din, technically speaking. Shifrah and Puah said that the dinim of Shavuos bnei noach, we're not killing babies. And in the Sheva mitzvahs bnei noach, not killing babies is Lasheves Yitzhara. Lasheves Yitzhara means about making the world a place of life, of beauty, of peace. So Vayitem, Elikim, Lamayaldes, Elikim was good to the midwives who were delivering babies and protecting babies in the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei category, and there were a lot of babies born. But then it says, Vayiki Yoru on this Elikim. Yoru Hamyal Elikim, I'm interpreting as follows. Shifrah and Puah were B'nei Noach. They were living in Chutz La'aretz. They were not the Aves. They volunteered to keep Tayag mitzvahs. They volunteered to keep mitzvahs as Jews. Okay, tell us the beat, please. Oh, they volunteered to do mitzvahs as Yidden. So I'm giving you two insights. Vayiru hamayaldas vayiki yaru hamazlakim means Shifrah and Puah volunteered to do mitzvahs as a Yidden who are makayim tayag mitzvahs, right? Now, when you are makayim tayag mitzvahs, you don't say that you're doing these mitzvahs to be a good person. You're saying you're doing these mitzvahs to be a holy person, to fulfill the divine will. So they got a second schar. What was the schar? V'yas lahem batim, says Rashi, koyanim, leviyim, malachim. What do koyanim, leviyim, and malachim have in common? It's a wonderful job, but let somebody else have it. Right? What did Esav say to Yankov Avinu? They're talking about the birthright of a firstborn. So Esav says to Yankov, what's the birth of a firstborn? Oh, you're going to be in the Beis HaMikdash. Oh, sounds good. If you make a wrong step, you're going to drop dead. So Esav says, keep it. The schar of Yaspa and Batim was consistent with the Hikiyadu Hamyaldis. In the pasuk before, they were rewarded for keeping the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Neach, with a lot of babies being born. That's a reward. In the second pasuk, when they showed Yiras Hashem, meaning to say they were keeping it also because they were volunteering to keep the Tayag mitzvahs, the schar that they got was, as the Lashon from Chazal, loy shrara nineisin lachem al avdos. The Rebbe would say this from time to time. When a person is appointed to a position of leadership amongst Jewish people, it is a burden. It's an honor. It's a schus. But it's a burden. It's a responsibility. When they embraced the will of Hashem on the level of the doing of the mitzvah, the Jewish people, they got a schar, and they're going to have to work even harder. They're going to be the leaders of the Jewish people, Kayanim, Leviim, and Malachim. And then, of course, the last pasuk of the parsha, which I'm sorry that I'm going on for so long, says, the party instructed all his people, which means also goyim, kol habein hayiled, every baby that's born, haya'edet hashachut should be thrown into the river Denai, v'chol habas t'chayna, the girls should be allowed to live. This gezeda was the most sinister of all. It was even against goyim. Okay? Now, of course, what is the message in this last pasuk? What is the message in the last pasuk? The message in the last pasuk, you forgive me for saying it, is the message of the end of the first Perek of Tanya, which is a Gemara. Sometimes people try to make themselves look good, and there's nothing good about them. And in the end, you see that they'll even kill their own. In the beginning, they want to do it secretly. Then they're doing it more overtly, and then they're killing their own babies. A Rasha is a Rasha is a Rasha. Okay, I'm sorry when I'm so long.